information there as well. So thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Lauren Sigmund, and I will be facilitating today's e-learning session, Cultivating Partnerships and Best Practices for Housing Counseling and Home Ownership Programs. And if you're joining today, maybe you've met us before, maybe this is your first time. This call is hosted by Grounded Solutions Network, and we're a national membership organization that seeks to cultivate communities that are equitable, inclusive, and rich in opportunity by advancing affordable housing solutions that last for generations. And we do this by supporting our members, allies, and the field through expert advice, trainings like this one, and technical assistance that's offered in a variety of forms. So just to kick things off, I'm going to share a few housekeeping notes about today's session. So enough housekeeping. To get us started, I want to thank our sponsors, including City Community Development, for helping to make this e-learning series possible. And so here's how we're going to be spending our time on today's call. So you'll hear a few success stories of housing counseling programs and home ownership programs that are collaborating well together in order to prepare and assist first-time home buyers. So as I mentioned, today's call will be very interactive in nature. We hope that you'll join by taking yourself off mute or joining into the chat. And we'll start with an overview of programs and partnerships. We'll hear from one of our members, Athens Land Trust, and then a couple of other guest speakers that we have the pleasure of hearing from today as well. We'll have a brief Q&A, but of course you can ask your questions throughout the session. And then before we end, we'll have an engaging discussion to talk through some of what we heard and learned from each other's unique challenges and successes and individual local context to apply what we've learned to the work that we do locally. And then before we wrap up fully, we'll come back together after our discussion to share some key resources and next steps. And so, to get us started, I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague Tiffany, the director of our Homekeeper program here at Grounded Solutions Network. So Homekeeper is a HUD-approved counseling management system that we built for home ownership and housing counseling programs. Tiffany has more than 20 years of experience working in the housing sector, community development field, and real estate industry. So I'm now pleased to pass it over to Tiffany.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yep, and feel free to start your webcam if you'd like to set up that function.
Sure. Start my webcam. Hi, everyone. So before we get in too deep into these details, I wanted to clarify really exactly what I'm referring to when we say home ownership program and housing counseling program. Just a minute. So when we at Grounded Solutions, when we talk about home ownership programs, we're referring to permanently affordable home ownership programs that seek to balance individual needs and wants on the left here with community wants and needs on the right, as seen here. So these programs balance individual wealth creation and the rewards that come from home ownership with creating home ownership opportunities with lasting affordability in a community. So Grounded Solution members and our membership primarily supports organizations managing these types of programs. So these homeownership programs with lasting affordability take on a variety of forms, as you may know, such as community land trusts, deed-restricted homes, and other variations listed here. They're managed by local municipalities, some Habitat for Humanity affiliates, local community land trusts, and other community-based nonprofits. And we're not going to go into too much detail about these types of programs right now, but suffice it to say that these programs are intending to keep homes affordable sale after sale. And hopefully there's one in your community if you're not running one and you're a housing counseling agency. And if there isn't, we can share more information at the end on how you can learn more about these program models. It's important to note that these home ownership programs are guided by our Grounded Solutions Network Stewardship Standards, which we created with and for practitioners in order to articulate practice standards and required practices for home ownership programs, particularly those with lasting affordability. if you're not familiar with these standards or any affordable homeownership programs, it's worth reading through these standards, and we can share the link with you and get that out to you. So, of course, local ordinances and funding restrictions also apply. There may be additional program terms that affect the process or the eligibility criteria or the length of affordability and so forth. So no programs are identical, so be sure to get to know the details and the specifics of the programs in your area. On the other end of the partnership that we're talking about today are the housing counseling programs. Welcome, some of you. The primary objective of these programs is really to help folks make smart decisions and improve their housing situations and meet the responsibilities of tenancy, and in particular in our case, for today, home ownership. So trained counselors, sometimes called home ownership advisors, work one-on-one with clients and also host group education workshops, including the 8-hour home buyer education course that is often required by either lenders or your home ownership programs. So if you run a home ownership program and you have not attended the 8-hour home buyer class that you're requiring of all of your home buyers, I recommend you sign up your staff for the next one so you can find out exactly what is covered during these counseling and home buyer education workshops. Housing counseling programs are managed by HUD-approved counseling agencies. These are private or public nonprofits. HUD-certified counselors are trained on financial management, home ownership, and other topics listed here, as you can see. A special thank you and shout out to the housing counselors from these agencies who registered for this call. So while housing counseling sometimes operates alongside home ownership programs in the same organization, that's not always the case, obviously. In a minute today, we'll hear from one organization with both a home ownership program and a housing counseling program, and hopefully a few others that partner and don't have everything under one roof. Counseling programs are managed by are guided by HUD requirements, as I mentioned before, for both the agency and organization as well as the counseling certification, although not all housing counseling programs fall under these regulations, as well as the national industry standards for home ownership education and counseling. There's also state regional certifying organizations that may have standards as well. For example, CHAPA in Massachusetts coordinates a collaborative that offers curriculum standards and best practice criteria for counseling agencies. So mention these standards because if you're only managing a home ownership program, I do recommend you review these standards to get a better idea of what best practice industry standards are for housing counseling programs. So obviously both homeownership and housing counseling programs are operating in the same communities often, and both are committed to expanding opportunities, particularly for low-income households. So it's pretty clear why we're aligned and partnered often to work towards homebuyer success. But since there were a few new programs that had registered on the call, I just wanted to lay out a few points that I came up with on why this partnership in particular is strategic. So read these over and feel free to add more compelling reasons why you think these programs strengthen each other. You can just add them into the chat box. On the left are the characteristics of the housing counselors that balance characteristics of homeownership programs. Give you a minute to read through these. If you're in a partnership, again, you can feel free to add your best reasons for why you're partnering in the chat box. So before we get to the practitioner speakers on the call, I have a very quick pop quiz, only 2 questions. So play along in your minds with me. Oops. Here we go. Um,
So folks should actually do more than play along, Tiffany. We have it set up so that they can vote on whether something is fact or fiction, or true or
very
false.
fancy. Very fancy. Thanks, Lauren. So homebuyer education is a part of most home ownership programs.
Okay, so I see we've got one person who voted. Excellent. Keep those votes coming.
Super. Lauren, can everyone see the results?
Yep, go for it.
All right, the big reveal. True. Oh man, it's a little hard for me to see, but it is true. Most homeownership programs require homebuyer education, even though most of them don't offer it themselves. So per our standards that Grounded Solutions have, our stewardship standards, programs should be verifying in writing that all homebuyers are completing a general homebuyer education course prior to purchase. In addition, according to our homeownership stewardship standards, we also encourage and require that counseling or education be provided specifically to explain the program requirements of the permanently affordable homeownership program. So for example, you should be providing training to home buyers on price restrictions, recapture provisions, or help buyers understand how much of a return they might receive when they resell and how the return will be calculated. And a host of other program requirements should be included in that training. If you're a housing counseling program and you want to learn more about these terms and terminologies, I suggest you sign up your entire counseling staff for a local orientation or training offered by your local home ownership program so we can get some cross-training going between our staffs of both organizations. Next up, housing counselors receive training on permanently affordable home ownership programs. Take a minute. There's a bit of a split. Again, what I'm talking about is housing counselors or home ownership advisors receive training on deed restrictions, long-term affordability covenants, and how resale formulas are calculated. So this is false for the most part, although I wish it were true a bit more. While counselors are expected to help homebuyers understand housing and financing options, permanently affordable homeownership is not explicitly included anywhere in the trainings or standards that I referenced earlier. I looked. I'd be interested to know more about, if you're a housing counselor, where you learned about these programs and how you got information about them. So because of this, counseling programs and home ownership programs really need to work together to figure out how do we keep our counselors and staff informed, but also trained enough on the ins and outs to help homebuyers make those educated decisions about whether or not to apply, how the program actually works, and so forth. So I did just want to call out this knowledge gap in the training curriculums in particular. So hopefully this very brief introduction was informative. I just wanted to give you a little bit more context on both homeownership programs and housing counseling, since this is the first time we've actually had both in a webinar. And so at this point, I wanted to turn over our webinar to the good folks at Athens Land Trust, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with as Homekeeper power users. So Kelsey, is David there too?
He's not.
Okay, so we have Kelsey here. I don't know if David's coming or not, but we definitely have Kelsey. I see you. You folks at Athens Land Trust have housing counseling and home ownership under one roof. I'm excited to hear more about your experiences, about how you help buyers navigate between the two programs, between yours and David's program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I think he got stuck in traffic, so we'll see if he rolls in here. If not, we'll be good to go. It'll be all right. Like Tiffany said, I'm the education director at Athens Land Trust, and part of that job is that I oversee our comprehensive housing counseling program. And David, my coworker, is our housing director, so he is overseeing the whole homeownership side, from construction and rehab to the actual taking the homeowners or potential homeowners through the loan process and following up with them after they've closed. So just kind of a brief overview of Athens Land Trust. We were established as a community land trust in 1994. We currently are building more than ever and have about 36 homeowners right now and 16 people who are lease purchasing with us. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's pretty similar to renting to own, but we like to say it's kind of the better way to do it, in our opinion, because we're putting aside a portion of their rent while they're living with us to prep them for their closing costs and just to kind of set up an emergency fund for them after they've closed if they have any maintenance issues. We also have about 6 rental units that we personally manage, and we co-own a 120-unit low-income housing tax credit apartment complex that we helped build in 2008. We're not the property managers, but we're still pretty involved and have actually gotten a lot of our homeowners from renters of that apartment complex. We first became a HUD-approved housing counseling agency in 2010, so we were definitely doing homeownership well before then, and I'll kind of expand in a minute on why we chose to make the jump over to being a HUD-certified housing counseling agency. In terms of our housing program, our homeownership program, David is our one full-time person dedicated to that, and then we have a person who splits her time between our homeownership and other programs within the agency. So we have about 1.5 full-time people. And in general, one thing that with our homeownership program is that after closing, we have a ton of regular contact to really maintain that stewardship with homeowners. And that works super well with our housing counseling program because I think a lot of time housing counselors don't get to interact with people once they've closed, and so we're able to kind of maintain that contact and relationship with them to help increase their success and really reduce the risk of foreclosure. So in terms of the housing counseling services that we offer, we have kind of the basic HUD required things now that the new certification has come out. One-on-one, we provide basic credit, financial management, and budget counseling, pre-purchase counseling, mortgage delinquency, and default resolution. So either helping people after they've gotten behind, or really what we try to do is prevent people from getting behind in the first place. And then we also do rental housing counseling, which typically looks a lot like helping people find rental housing or maintain it, and helping with tenant-landlord issues and fair housing issues. And then group services-wise, we have fair housing, pre-purchase education, financial budgeting and credit workshops, non-delinquency post-purchase, so a lot of that is financial management and maintenance after purchase, and then pre-purchase home buyer education workshops. The bulk of our services are going to be through that pre-purchase home buyer education, which is the 8-hour HUD certified class. We always offer that class once a month, and we've actually gotten, now that I have another housing counselor on staff, we're able to provide that twice a month sometimes. And then we usually do about 1 to 2 post-purchase workshops a year, depending on the need, and then at least 1 fair housing workshop during the year, typically in Fair Housing Month. So like I said, the majority of our clients are coming through with the pre-purchase workshops and pre-purchase counseling. We try to pair them up, and for most people coming through our class, they're also going to get some follow-up one-on-one counseling. We had about 328 client services last year, and something that might be different from other people on the line is that while we are serving people in our homeownership program, we're also serving 8 counties in Northeast Georgia. We are 100% open to anyone in need of housing counseling services, and we only have 1 full-time housing counselor right now, Waikia, and then myself, I oversee the housing counseling program, and I still do some counseling and education when needed. The majority of our clients are coming from the county that we live in, and every single one of our homeowners or potential homeowners comes through one-on-one counseling and the homebuyer education. But unfortunately, due to agencies closing throughout the region, we're one of the only regular housing counseling agencies that is regularly providing workshops and classes. And I think there's a question about what kind of post-purchase workshops we hold. A lot of them are on maintenance. I just find that a lot of people, once they buy, are like, oh, now what? Or just some regular things that they can do around the home to maintain their home. And then we also really try to tie in financial management to prevent foreclosure, and a lot of will and estate planning, making sure that people, once they buy, have a way to leave their home to who they want to leave it to and understand that whole estate planning process. So a big thing is trying to figure out kind of how we're 2 separate agencies, or kind of 2 separate programs, like how do people get to us? And so this first scenario, really we're a 50-50 split, and for the most part, they come one of 2 ways. This is the first way. People can complete the Athens Land Trust application, so they simply know us as a community land trust. They're interested in home ownership, and they're like, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. And so they fill out an application, and we meet with them one-on-one and review their credit and income, and then we typically, at that point, are like, hey, because you're interested, we need you to work through our 8-hour homebuyer education workshop. And so that's when they then enter into the housing counseling program. So they take the course, and typically from there are set up with monthly housing counseling sessions. And once someone enters into our homebuyer or into our home ownership program, they are required to meet with the housing counselor once a month until they have closed. And then kind of the reverse is that within our 8-hour workshop and within our one-on-one counseling, we always really try to make all of the programs available to people. So we don't just sell our program. We're going to sell every affordable home ownership program that exists in our county, and all the loan programs. So a lot of times what will happen is there's a section within the 8-hour workshop where we present on 4 different home ownership options in Athens, Clarke County, and I give all the information to everyone, and then a lot of times people will come up to me after the class and they're like, hey, I'm really interested in Athens Land Trust. Can you give me more information? And from that point, I then give them David's contact information, and they sit down with him one-on-one for him to tell them more. And then, you know, not all the time will they enter into our program, but once they have an application in, we have them to pull from when we have things open, and make sure they're getting all the information they need. So I wouldn't say that we really have one, I don't know, if I had to say, we probably have more people just interested in our home ownership program, and that's how they enter, and then they receive counseling, as opposed to the opposite way, but it really is a 2-way street. And so in terms of our housing counseling, we really decided to become a housing counseling agency of our own, because our housing program was growing really quickly, and we needed every person to complete the workshop. And so sometimes we didn't really have a place to refer them because the class wasn't being held or the counselors weren't available at the other housing counseling agencies in our county. We also wanted to make sure that everyone was receiving the most comprehensive services, and sometimes it's difficult for that to be scheduled, or we couldn't really do the quality control. And then unfortunately there was still, and still is currently, some skepticism just around the community land trust model. There's a lot of miseducation and just lack of education in general in what ground lease is and how that type of home ownership works. So we felt like sometimes people were being steered away from our program as they were going through the home ownership counseling, which, you know, if it isn't a good fit, it isn't. But we like to make sure that people had the correct information about what a community land trust is and how that home ownership works and why it is an option for some people. So our guiding approach in general is that we want to provide the most comprehensive services to every person that walks through our door, whether they're going to be an Athens Land Trust homeowner or they're going to buy 8 counties away and I never see them again after counseling. We really try to be a one-stop shop in Athens and Northeast Georgia in general, and so we try to be able to provide the whole continuum of housing counseling services, so from rental to foreclosure prevention. If we can provide it here, we'd like to, and we'd like to stop having to refer people out to other housing counseling agencies. I'm sure most of you know it can be really frustrating to feel like you're being bounced around to a bunch of different people. So in general, I think the biggest thing for us is making sure that people know all of their options when we're seeing them. Not steering people to our program and not steering people to others, but making sure, you know, with housing counseling, it's the rule of 3. It's making sure you're giving people 3 references for everything, and we're giving people all the information that we have. And one thing I'll say is that that's kind of the most important thing I can say if people are trying to consider merging their programs or adding on housing counseling or adding on home ownership, is really making sure there is a separation there. You don't want it to seem like you're just doing housing counseling to get people into your home ownership program. At the end of the day, you want people to be the most successful and to have the best home ownership option for them. And it might not always be a community land trust model. So if you are considering it, I'd share that you talk to other agencies and see how they keep that separation. With us, it's that David isn't a HUD certified housing counselor. He knows a lot of those stuff, but he shouldn't be the person counseling someone to buy the home. And so just some pros and cons, and I'll quickly wrap up here. So one of the biggest benefits is really having your housing counselor be able to be there throughout the whole loan process. So most of the time, your housing counselor sees you, and then you might play phone tag while you're going through the mortgage process. I can be with someone literally from the first day they walk into the door until they sell their home at a resale with the community land trust. I'm at the closings. I can be there when we're putting in the loan application. I really am able to guide them and not have to pass them off to other people throughout the way. We also know exactly what type of education the homeowner is getting, and that we feel like we're providing quality services and we're never having to question whether they fully understand things because we've worked with them from the get-go. Another huge pro is being able to really openly discuss issues and challenges with the housing staff. When it comes to me and David, we're able to sit there and know that when we take someone to the bank to buy a house, that they're so prepared and that there are no questions about whether this is a good fit or whether they're ready. We're essentially underwriting them together before we even ever send them to the bank. And there's a lot of transparency within the programs now, especially as we have transitioned to Homekeeper as our housing client management system. We used HCO in the past, and really I was the only person seeing that. And so now David can check in and say, hey, like this lease purchaser has been to counseling every single month since she moved in. I know she's compliant with her lease. Or, hey, why did so-and-so miss housing counseling last month? He's able to check in and see that without me having to go to him with the information. And then drawbacks, like I said before, the biggest thing is really making sure that you're keeping a separation of interest especially in a small agency. Within the housing department, there's like 3.5 of us, so we're not huge, and so it can be easy to go down the wrong path when it comes to kind of steering someone into your program. So I know there are plenty of housing directors out there that are also housing counselors, and as long as they're able to keep that, that's fine. But my one recommendation would be that you really do try to separate that as much as possible. And another drawback is that with the new HUD rules, there are a lot of regulations for housing counseling agencies, and if you are going to be a staff of 1 or 2, this can be pretty burdensome. There is a lot of reporting that comes along with it. Even if you don't get HUD funding, you still have to report all of your things to HUD and get monitored by HUD every 3 years. So that can make it pretty challenging if you're going to be a staff of 1 or 2, or you have no idea where to start. We do get HUD funding, but it comes through our state housing finance agency, and so like Tiffany was saying at the beginning, we're kind of held to all of these different standards. So HUD standards, national industry standards, our state and housing finance standards, and we also get local funding for housing counseling. So we're held to those HUD CDBG standards as well. And so if you're not ready to deal with a bunch of red tape and reporting, perhaps it's not the time for you to become a housing counseling agency. And then in terms of funding, it can be an issue. We only get about 25% of our funding from HUD right now, and on our current timeline, we get reimbursed for our expenditures pretty much a year after we make them. So for a lot of agencies in our area, they've had to close, which, you know, as a region makes us have a lot more people coming through our doors. So yeah, that's us, and I think you're going to hear from a few more people. And I think we'll answer questions at the end.
Great, thank you so much. And now, Tiffany, I think I'll pass it back to you to introduce our next speakers. Tiffany, it looks like maybe you're on mute.
Great, super. So I think having the homeownership and housing counseling in one organization, that's just one way of doing that. And so I wanted to show the other side of it, which is maybe the more likely scenario of where you folks are at on either end of the partnership right now. And so we have Stacy Horowitz, Operations Director from the City of Lakes Community Land Trust. And I invited her to share how she's making a partnership work without bringing housing counseling in-house. Stacy, are you available to chime in?
Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks so much for calling in. So I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts about how to overcome some of the drawbacks that you have of not having under one roof, and what are some of the benefits that you see as well from having it the way you've structured it?
Sure. So just to give everyone a kind of a quick overview of the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, we are now in our 16th year of operation. We started in 2002 and sold our first home in 2004. We now have about 255 homes in the City of Lakes Community Land Trust and have helped about 300 households in that same time period, the difference being the resales of about 54 homes in the land trust. We do a broad range of housing programs, from a buyer-initiated program to also developing our own homes for resale through vacant home rehabs or new construction. We serve about 25 to 30 households per year, and that's a combination of resales and new properties. Currently, the land trust staff is 4 full-time and 2 part-time, and I just wanted to share that to kind of give you an overview of what our capacity is currently, as well as what we do from a production side. So when we started back in 2002, it was just an individual staff person, and we added the second staff person right around 2004. And it made the most sense for us to figure out partnerships at that time. And it included both developers, because we did not develop our own homes at that time, and in particular for the buyer education pre-purchase counseling. And so in those first few years of our existence, we established some very strong relationships with home buying counseling agencies in the Minneapolis area in particular. Our organization just serves the city of Minneapolis currently. Within Minnesota, we have a network of counseling agencies. So I think we are very fortunate in that sense, in that there's a number of partner organizations that we could work with, and we weren't reliant on just one or two particular agencies, and that remains the case even today. And so while we started there, we are continuing to partner, and we do not do our own home buyer counseling from a home buyer education pre-purchase counseling. The City of Lake still does the land trust specific orientation, and we provide at least 2 to 3 of those per month for buyers who are interested in the homeownership programs through the land trust. What we did do, and we continue to do in a little different format, is that when we partnered with the counseling agencies, we were able to do like a 10 to 15 minute overview of the land trust and how community land trust ownership works in most of the pre-purchase buyer education workshop sessions. So in our case, the format for that education includes a section on affordable housing and affordable housing options, and the agencies would allow us to come in and do the community land trust presentation. We still do that, but in a little different format, in that we've done more of a video presentation just because it became quite intensive for staff to be trying to do 2 or 3 presentations a weekend, and sometimes up to 5 to 6 a month in addition to our land trust presentations. What the partnering has allowed us to do is really cultivate strong relationships with the agencies that have assisted us long term. So while it helps us to satisfy that requirement on the front end during the buying process and that pre-purchase education, it has also created those long-term partnerships that allow us to really tap into resources that we just quite frankly could not and do not have the capacity to have. That's different post-purchase counseling needs, foreclosure prevention, and really has helped us to, if you will, augment the capacity that we have significantly and serve our homeowners much better than we could have as an independent organization. We do run pretty lean, and I expect that we'll continue to run pretty lean, but yet we're a long-term partner in these transactions and in the ownership of the home. And so when you have that long-term partnership, there is an expectation that you become a resource for different situations that happen during the time that someone is in ownership of a land trust home. In addition to the counseling and the foreclosure prevention that happens post-purchase, the land trust also does some homeowner training, and we do maintenance similar to what Athens shared. And then we also do a wills and trusts. So when you tap in a little bit more into the financial piece, that's become one of our more popular post-purchase workshops to really begin to help homeowners think about this asset and then how is it managed long term. And so I think I'll stop there. Unless, Tiffany, there's anything else you'd like me to touch on.
No, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing. And if folks have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat box, and we'll have some time at the end. I also invited a housing counseling director, Denise Freeman, to chime in from her perspective. Denise is on the line, hopefully, from the National Council on Agricultural Life and Labor, and I wanted her to share her perspective from preparing counselors and coordinating with homeownership programs, which she's done quite a bit of.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So yes, my name is Denise Freeman, and I'm the Housing Counselor Director at NCAL Research. National Council on Agricultural Life and Labor is such a long title, so we shortened it to an acronym and we pronounce it NCAL. And we have been in business since for about 42 years now, providing guidance to families who are looking to purchase affordable housing. At NCAL, we have a staff of 5 full-time pre-purchase housing counselors and 3 full-time foreclosure and prevention counselors. We also have a line of business under financial coaching, and we have 5 dedicated financial coaches as well. We've celebrated about 8,750 families that have been successful with purchasing a home, so we're very proud of that. We're also very proud of the partnerships that we have established throughout the years with other nonprofits and other community lenders in the industry. So one of the things that we found very successful is partnerships. And I know that a lot of the other listeners on the line have established partnerships as well. But we really find it key in order for us to be able to reach out more into the community. There are many organizations that would love to see their staff or their employees to be able to purchase homes. They're just not sure how to go about providing a safe place for them to work, providing them a decent income, and then providing them with resources to be able to live close to work. So we've been able to go out into the community, talk with different organizations. How can we complement what they offer? The key is to really do your research and find out what they're missing and not go in to replace, but to enhance or to complement what they have. Another really important partnership that we've been able to establish in the state of Delaware is a partnership with other HUD agencies. It's called the Delaware Federation of Housing Counselors. And we live in a small state in the state of Delaware. So there's about 10 or 11 HUD approved agencies, but we have been established since 1991, about 27 years, that there are 9 HUD agencies that are all under one roof called the Federation of Housing Counselors. And we get together regularly and just share different ideas, things that we find challenging, things that are successful. We still compete. I mean, we are still individual agencies. However, when it comes to how we can get the word out to lenders, realtors, the community, we come together and share ideas of how to go about that. So I would definitely recommend for agencies that are really looking to market themselves and to provide their services, look in your state, look in your cities and your towns, and look at the different employers that are there, or the lenders or the realtors, and speak to them about what their needs are and offer them the services that you provide that can have their employees either closer to where they work or to provide them with resources that can help them with down payment and settlement assistance, and just the education of knowing that there are programs available to help with first-time homeownership.
Denise, can you hear me?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit specifically about those partnerships with either the land trusts or habitats and how you coordinate either to sort of make it a smooth process for the home buyers, and also how you close that information gap with information sharing between those partners?
Absolutely. So in our state, the land trust and the habitat are not HUD approved, but they still have families and customers that need that resource, they need that tool. So we will provide workshops in all of our offices each month, introducing them to an orientation. Those families are welcome to come to our orientation to find out the advantages and disadvantages of homeownership, to hear about down payment and settlement assistance, to know what lenders are offering what programs. Once they have come to our orientation, we provide them with information as far as how the community land trust works and forever affordable housing, if there is a lease on the property, how long that's there for. And it's one of the many ways that homeownership is possible. As the other speaker was saying earlier, it may not be for everyone, but it's definitely a tool, and it's a resource that families take advantage of if they really understand the land trust, as well as the Habitat program. They come through our workshops. We provide them with financial literacy. We have a program called Credit Smart, where they come in and learn about banking and credit, budgeting. Once they completed that, they receive a certificate of completion. They in turn provide that with their Habitat family coordinator or with the land trust. They are invited to a full day workshop where we have subject matter experts that come in, a realtor, a lender, a home inspector, an insurance agent, an attorney, where they are provided with just a huge amount of information to help their journey to homeownership. And once that's complete, we just make sure that we follow up with them afterwards to ensure that they not just become a homeowner, but they are a successful homeowner. So even though they don't provide all the counseling and everything that's required for homeownership, as a housing counseling agency, we're able to partner with them and provide that for them.
Super. Thanks so much for sharing more about your organization and your partnerships in your community.
Great. So at this point, we're going to open it up to any questions and comments that folks have for any of our presenters. So please feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to go ahead and unmute folks who I have manually muted. So give me a moment to do that. And you also can feel free to start asking questions into the chat as well. Also, I just want to encourage attendees, even if you are not technically a presenter, if you feel like you've got a good answer to someone's question, feel free to come off mute and share your perspective. Great, it looks like we've got a question coming in on the chat. Okay. So we have a question. What is the funding balance to support your work? And would love for any of our presenters to feel free to answer that question.
Are you referring to just the housing counseling program or both homeownership and housing counseling?
Well, looks like yes, housing, our questioner asked.
So as far as housing, this is Kelsey from Athens Land Trust. In reference to kind of our housing counseling, we currently get funding from HUD and our local county, and then also we get a decent amount of support from banks such as Wells Fargo, Bank of America, And I think our total yearly budget for housing counseling is around $80,000 a year, but it's been much smaller in the past. But currently we're around $80,000, and then homeownership wise is a whole different story because we're building new construction. Does that answer your question?
Yep, looks like the comment in the chat says yes. All right, looks like we've got maybe one or two other questions coming in through the chat. Please feel free to come off mute or enter your own question in the chat as well. All right, we've got another question. How do you overcome the perception that a CLT is competition for other affordable housing organizations? How do you make the education partnership?
This is Stacy. I think part of what was helpful for us early on is that we actually worked with a number of the not-for-profit and for-profit developers. We did not start out as a developer. We have moved into that position as more developing our own homes, and yet we still continue to work with most of the developers in town. So as far as direct competition with other affordable housing programs, I think because we had those partnerships early on, and there is some tension, admittedly, there always is going to be when multiple organizations with similar type missions are going after the funding that's available, but I think we've worked in tangent with one another long enough to be able to have some of those candid conversations. And then we're also usually have some additional affordability assistance that can often help some of the other affordable housing organizations actually achieve their goals as well. And as far as the education partnerships, I think we kind of knew what we were really good at and where we wanted to focus, and we continue to try to keep that in the forefront of the partnerships and the relationships. And I think knowing that we're not trying to get into that competitive realm with the counseling side and some of the education, and yet can bring that that expertise in the community land trust piece. So it's really working together so that buyers know their full range of options, and the fact that we've continued to just choose not to be a counseling agency, whether the pre-education or the post-buying, or excuse me, post-purchase counseling. So I think for us, at least, that's helped to just keep the education partnerships in place and figure out how we support one another, making referrals back and forth where it seems that the buyer will benefit the most in a particular relationship.
And I want to add to that as well, Stacy, that it's really important that you keep that line of communication open. We don't seem to struggle so much with the competitive portion with builders or with other affordable housing organizations. It's more of understanding the land trust, that the family doesn't own the land, they're leasing the land. But when you look at how much more affordable that home is and think about, well, I'm going to be living in this home, I'm going to provide a roof over my head for myself and my family, and this is a really doable option for me. We make sure that that family is equipped with all the tools they need to be successful homeowners as well as land trusts, but ensuring that the land trust is educating that family as well, with understanding what that means for themselves and when they want to move on to the next property, when they want to sell.
And I'll add that in terms of competition. Athens is small, and we have about 3 affordable homeownership programs, and we're always all at capacity. And so I think trying to communicate that with other people is that, yes, we might be all kind of in the same sphere of what we're doing, but there's so much work that can be done and needs to be done, and everyone hopefully chooses the program that fits them best, and we're not all perfect for everyone. And so just trying to really focus on the fact that we're an option, like community land trusts are an option, and doing a lot of education around why someone would even want to be a CLT homeowner, and then just keeping the emphasis on the people and the homeowners, and that we're all here to increase affordable homeownership. It doesn't have to be a competition because there's always more people to serve.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the rich questions and really helpful answers from our presenters. At this point, we're going to move into a discussion. So please feel free to come off mute, join the conversation, and also you're welcome to share any comments or thoughts that you have in the chat as well if you're not joining on audio. But before we break out into a group discussion, I'm just going to pass it back to Tiffany for a few final thoughts.
Super, thank you. So I just wanted to set the stage before we jump into some discussion questions. Hopefully you folks have some insights you can share with each other. But just hearing and knowing what the folks were wanting to talk about and share with you all, I just wanted to pull out some key themes for having a successful partnership, and that's really under, these listed here, so mutual understanding of both sides, the programs and the services, even if you're not the ones doing the frontline training, and that you are helping homebuyers evaluate all options. We heard that loud and clear. And then the last two, which we've touched on a little bit, which is the smooth transitions between the programs, both for pre-purchase and for post-purchase. So whether that's like how you assign a counselor that stays with one homeownership program if you're partnering with a program and maintain that continuity to mimic some of the continuity that Kelsey was talking about or not. And then certainly what Denise was talking about in terms of strong network of partners that extends beyond the program. So I just wanted to call out these themes in our discussion so far. And obviously, these principles are much easier to talk about in bullet points than putting into practice. So the questions I had were really more about understanding how you put those principles into action. And I would be interested in hearing from you all, what implementation tips you can share, what strategies you have for strengthening partnership, and who else are you partnering with to improve outcomes for your home buyers. And so you can put it in the chat box, and it looks like some of you may be off mute, so be interested in hearing what came up for you as you were listening to the folks on the call. This webinar with some resources and next steps for you. Let me just start off with a few of them. If you're interested in learning more about Homekeeper, that's my program that I work on that Kelsey was referencing briefly during the call. You can learn more at myhomekeeper.org. It's a web-based platform to manage homeownership or housing counseling programs in one place online.
And another great resource just to bring to your attention is that if you're not already a member of our network, Grounded Solutions, we hope that you'll consider joining. So we offer organizational and individual memberships. And as you can see on your screen, there's a variety of reasons to join, including free access to our monthly e-learning series for calls like this one, technical assistance grants, and even discounts to our annual conference. And so we are currently in our membership drive. So if you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to visit groundedsolutions.org/membership. And so, speaking of our e-learning series, here's a quick preview on the upcoming calls. We've got a session on harnessing the power of data storytelling for advocacy coming up in August. In September, we'll be talking about permanently affordable home ownership. And then October, we have our annual conference, and in November, we'll have a members-only discussion on a topic of your choice. And so in the follow-up from this session today, you'll have a chance to vote on a potential topic that you might want to discuss.
Great, and if you're a housing counseling organization and you're part of the Leaders in Housing Counseling webinar series, we are going to be presenting, Grounded Solutions Network, we are going to be presenting to housing counselors more information about permanently affordable homeownership, similar to our e-learning webinar, but condensed for that format, and that will be on August 2nd. You can go to housingcenter.org, the website here, and tune in for that webinar.
And if you want to engage with us in person, we hope that you'll join us in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for our national conference, Intersections 2018. So Intersections provides an unequal chance to network, learn, and gain essential tools to revitalize communities and provide greater access to opportunity. I'm personally very excited. I think our countdown today is that we're 97 days away from the conference, and the sessions and seminars that are shaping up to really be engaging are also being led by some of the most committed and creative professionals in this field who are dedicated to building equitable and inclusive communities across our nation and internationally. We'll also hear from some of our international folks. So I saw some mention of some folks from Canada, and I think I've also heard we'll have some attendees from Belgium, and so the conversation is far and wide and reaching. I also just want to plug that registration opens on July 2nd. So check out the conference section of groundedsolutions.org to find out more and to stay alert for registration. And so this brings us to the end of our conversation. We hope that you'll take a few minutes to answer a very brief survey that you'll receive in your email sometime today or tomorrow. It really helps us to get your perspective on the e-learning sessions within this series so that we can continue to improve our online learning offerings and create stronger content that best meets your needs. So thank you so much for joining us today. Here's the contact information of some of our speakers. We'll also be sending out the slides and a recording of the presentation so that you can share it with any of your colleagues who might not have been able to join today's call. And don't hesitate to be in touch if you think of further questions or have other thoughts that you want to explore. We're here to continue the conversation with you. So with that, thank you so much for joining today's session and have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you.